Ambassador Korath walked slowly into the massive war chamber, his clawed feet clicking against the polished metal floor. The room was huge, with a circular table at its center where 7 different alien species sat waiting. Each species looked different, some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like giant insects. But they all had one thing in common: they were here to plan a war. The Skarn Dominion sat on his left. They looked like giant lizards with sharp teeth and red eyes. Their leader, General Vex, was drumming his claws on the table, clearly excited about the coming battle. Next to them sat the Nexus Empire, tall blue creatures with 4 arms each. Their commander, Thale, was studying star charts on a small device. Korath took his seat and looked around the table. These were some of the most dangerous military forces in the galaxy. Together, they had destroyed dozens of worlds and enslaved entire civilizations. Now they wanted to attack the humans. "Welcome, Ambassador Korath," said Admiral Zork from the hegemony. He was a massive creature, almost 3 times the size of a human, with thick gray skin and tiny black eyes. "We have been waiting for you." Korath nodded politely. "Thank you for including the Kelvani Empire in these discussions. However, I must speak honestly about the target you have chosen." General Vex laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. "The humans? They are barely worth our attention. Our scouts report they have only basic weapons and simple ships. Their colonies are spread thin across maybe 200 worlds." "That is exactly what worries me," Korath said quietly. 30 years ago, my people had a small encounter with the humans. It was supposed to be a simple patrol mission. Commander Thale looked up from his device. "What happened? Did they surrender immediately?" Korath felt his stomach tighten as he remembered. "We found one of their ships in neutral space. It was small, maybe 1/10 the size of our patrol vessels. Our captain demanded they surrender for inspection. And they complied, of course," said Admiral Zork with confidence. "No," Korath replied slowly. "They refused. The human captain said something strange. She said her crew would rather die than be slaves to anyone." The other aliens around the table began to chuckle. "Brave words from a tiny ship," commented General Vex. "What did your people do? Destroy them as an example?" Korath was quiet for a long moment. "We tried. The human ship was called the Discovery. It had 47 people on board, including children. Our 3 patrol cruisers should have been able to capture it easily." "Should have?" asked Commander Thale, now paying closer attention. "The human captain did something we had never seen before," Korath continued. "Instead of trying to run or fight normally, she turned her ship into a weapon. She overloaded their power systems and rammed our lead cruiser at full speed." Admiral Zork leaned forward, his massive bulk making the chair creak. "Suicide attacks are not unknown. Many desperate species try such things." "This was different," Korath insisted. "The explosion was so powerful it destroyed not just our lead ship, but damaged the other 2 cruisers so badly they had to be scrapped. 47 humans killed over 300 of our people." The room fell silent for a moment. Then General Vex spoke up. "One incident means nothing. Perhaps that particular crew was mentally unstable." Korath shook his head. "We studied their communications during the battle. The human captain was completely calm. She was singing something called a lullaby to the children on her ship right before the collision. She made a choice to die rather than surrender, and her crew supported her decision." "You are letting fear cloud your judgment," said Admiral Zork dismissively. "One ship does not represent an entire species. After the incident, my government ordered a full intelligence review of the human species," Korath continued. "What we found disturbed us greatly. The humans have something they call history, and it is full of stories about people who chose death over surrender." Commander Thale set down his device. "All species have warriors who fight bravely. This proves nothing." Korath stood up, his voice becoming more urgent. "You do not understand. It is not just their warriors. In human history, entire cities have chosen to destroy themselves rather than be conquered. Civilians, children, elderly, families, have died fighting rather than accept defeat." "Impossible," scoffed General Vex. "No rational species behaves this way." "That is exactly my point," Korath said desperately. "The humans are not rational by our standards. They fight for ideas that they consider more important than their own lives. They call these ideas freedom and independence." Admiral Zork pounded his massive fist on the table. "Enough. Your people have become soft, Korath. Fear has made you see monsters where there are only primitives with outdated weapons." The other commanders nodded in agreement. Charts and tactical displays showed human space, scattered colonies with basic defenses, small patrol fleets, no major military installations. On paper it looked like easy prey. "I am calling for a formal vote," announced Admiral Zork. "All in favor of proceeding with the invasion of human space?" One by one, 6 arms rose around the table. Only Korath kept his hand down. "The motion passes," declared Admiral Zork. "In 7 days our combined fleets will begin the conquest of human territory. Their resources will fuel our expansion for generations to come." As the other commanders began discussing fleet positions and attack plans, Korath remained seated, staring at the star chart showing human space. He had tried to warn them, but they would not listen. Soon, these proud military leaders would discover what he already knew. The humans did not simply fight wars. They fought as if their souls depended on victory. And that made them the most dangerous enemy any of them would ever face. The meeting ended with excited chatter about easy victories and quick profits. Korath left the chamber knowing he had just witnessed the beginning of a disaster that would cost millions of lives on both sides. Admiral James Harrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the Defiant, watching the screens that showed enemy vessels moving through human space like angry wolves. The aliens had arrived exactly 1 week ago, and already 17 mining stations were gone. Smoke still rose from 12 farming worlds where families had lived for generations. "Sir, we have another message from the alien fleet," said Lieutenant Emma Walsh. She was young, maybe 25, and her hands shook slightly as she worked the communication controls. "Put it on the main screen," Harrison ordered. His voice was calm, but inside he felt anger building like a storm. The screen filled with the image of a creature that looked like a giant lizard wearing military armor. Its red eyes gleamed with satisfaction, and its mouth was full of sharp teeth that seemed designed for tearing flesh. "I am General Vex of the Skarn Dominion," the creature announced. "Your pathetic outer colonies burn as we speak. Your mining stations are destroyed, your farming worlds abandoned. Surely you can see that resistance is hopeless." Harrison studied the alien's confident posture. General Vex stood straight, his clawed hands clasped behind his back like he was already the winner. Behind him, Harrison could see other alien species on the bridge of their ship, tall blue creatures with 4 arms, massive gray beings with tiny eyes, and others that looked even stranger. "I have a simple offer for your species," General Vex continued. "Surrender now and your people will be allowed to work in our mines and factories. Refuse and we will take your worlds anyway, but your people will suffer greatly first." Harrison waited a moment before responding. Around him, his bridge crew watched silently. They had all seen the reports from the outer colonies, entire families killed, children missing, homes turned to ash. "I'm Admiral Harrison of the Terran Defense Force," he said finally. "I have a different offer for you, General Vex. Turn your ships around and leave human space immediately. Go back to wherever you came from and never return." General Vex laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. "You amuse me, human. Your ships flee before our advance. Your colonies burn without resistance. What possible threat could you pose to our combined fleets?" Other alien voices could be heard laughing in the background. They clearly thought the human response was some kind of joke. Harrison looked directly into the alien's red eyes. "You'll find out soon enough. This is your only warning." "Warning?" General Vex laughed even harder. "Human, we have destroyed civilizations that had technology far beyond yours. We have conquered species that fought with weapons you cannot even imagine. Your little patrol boats are no match for our battle fleets." "Cut the transmission," Harrison told Lieutenant Walsh. The alien's mocking laughter disappeared as the screen went dark. Harrison turned to face his crew. Every person on the bridge was looking at him, waiting for orders. "Commander Roberts," Harrison said to his tactical officer, "send a message to Earth Command. Tell them to begin Operation Shepherd's Hook immediately." Commander Roberts hesitated. "Sir, that means abandoning everything beyond the Centauri line. We're talking about 57 colonies, 3 major mining operations and 2 shipbuilding facilities." "I know exactly what it means," Harrison replied firmly. "But those outer colonies were always meant to be expendable if this day ever came. We're not abandoning them, we're using them as bait." Lieutenant Walsh looked confused. "Bait, sir?" Harrison moved to the large tactical display that showed human space as a 3-dimensional map of stars and planets. Red markers indicated where alien ships were currently located, moving steadily inward toward Earth and the major human worlds. "The aliens think they're chasing a beaten enemy," Harrison explained. "They see our ships retreating and assume we're running scared. But look at their movement pattern, they're following the exact route we want them to follow." He pointed to the display, showing how the alien advance was being funneled between two large asteroid fields and a dangerous nebula that made long-range scanning difficult. Every colony they destroy, every mining station they attack, brings them deeper into the trap, Harrison continued. They think they're winning, but they're actually walking into the biggest ambush in human military history. Commander Roberts studied the tactical display with new understanding. The Centauri defense grid? Exactly, Harrison confirmed. Hidden weapon platforms, concealed fleet bases, and enough firepower to turn this entire region of space into a graveyard. But first, we need to let the aliens think they're unstoppable. Over the next 3 hours, Harrison watched as evacuation orders went out across human space. On dozens of worlds, families packed their most precious belongings into ships and fled toward the inner colonies. Mining stations were abandoned, their valuable equipment left behind. Military bases that had taken years to build were quietly emptied. To any outside observer, it looked like panic. The aliens intercepted many of the evacuation communications and heard human voices filled with fear and desperation. Children crying, parents worried about leaving their homes, officials struggling to maintain order during the retreat. "Sir," Lieutenant Walsh reported, "we're receiving transmission from the colony on Kepler 442b. They're requesting permission to stay and defend their homes." Harrison felt a pain in his chest. The colonists on Kepler 442b were mostly farmers and their families. They had no military training and only basic weapons. If they stayed, they would all die. "Negative," he said quietly. "Tell them to evacuate immediately. That's a direct order." "They're refusing, sir. The colony leader says they won't abandon the graves of their children to alien invaders." Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. This was the hardest part of command, making decisions that meant good people would die. But if the plan was going to work, every human civilian needed to be safely away from the battle zone. "Send them one more message," Harrison decided. "Tell them that their sacrifice will be remembered, but the best way to honor their children is to survive and help us rebuild after the war." An hour later, sensors showed the Kepler 442b colony ships finally lifting off, heading for safety in the inner systems. Behind them, alien vessels moved in to occupy another abandoned human world, never suspecting they were being led exactly where humanity wanted them to go. The trap was almost ready. Soon, the aliens would discover what humans were really capable of when their backs were against the wall. The alien fleet moved deeper into human space like a pack of hungry wolves. General Vex stood in his command room, watching the tactical displays with growing satisfaction. For 3 weeks, his forces had been pushing forward, and the humans continued to run away from every battle. "Sir," reported his aide, a smaller Skarn named Krill, "our advanced scouts have reached the Centauri system. Still no major human military presence detected." General Vex's red eyes gleamed with pleasure. "Excellent. The humans are even weaker than we thought. Soon we will reach their precious Earth and end this pathetic resistance." Around him, other coalition commanders shared similar reports. The tall blue Nexus beings had taken 6 more mining stations without a fight. The massive gray hegemony forces had occupied 3 agricultural worlds, finding only empty farms and abandoned equipment. Every day brought new proof that the humans were cowards who preferred to run rather than fight. "General," called the sensor operator, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from asteroid field Delta 7. Vex moved to the sensor station. "Explain." "The energy signatures don't match normal asteroid composition, sir. It might be some kind of mineral deposit, but the patterns seem artificial." Before Vex could respond, the bridge lights suddenly went dark. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in pulsing red light. Alarm sirens began wailing throughout the ship. "Report." Vex roared, his claws extending instinctively. "Multiple contacts emerging from the asteroid field," the sensor operator called out, his voice filled with panic. "Dozens of ships, sir, but they're not like anything we've seen before." The main screen showed what had been empty space just moments ago. Now it was filled with human vessels that seemed to appear out of nowhere. But these weren't the small patrol boats or merchant ships the coalition had been chasing. These ships were different, angular, brutal-looking things that seemed designed for one purpose only: killing. "Energy signatures are off the charts," reported another crew member. "These ships are putting out more power than our heavy cruisers." Captain David Miller's voice suddenly filled the coalition bridge, transmitted on all frequencies. "This is Captain Miller of the Human Defense Force. You wanted to see what we're really capable of? Congratulations. You're about to get a demonstration." Vex felt his blood run cold. The human's voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it that made his scales prickle with fear. All ships, battle stations. Vex commanded. Prepare to engage the human fleet. But before his crew could respond, something impossible happened. The lead human ship, barely half the size of Vex's flagship, suddenly accelerated directly toward them. Its engines were pushed so hard they were glowing white-hot. "They're attempting a ramming attack," Krill observed with disbelief. "But they'll be destroyed in the collision." Vex watched in horror as more human ships followed the same course. Dozens of vessels were accelerating toward coalition ships, ignoring all tactical sense. No sane military commander would order such attacks. Evasive maneuvers. Vex shouted, but it was too late. The first human ship didn't simply ram into a coalition cruiser. At the last possible moment, when collision was unavoidable, it unleashed every weapon it had at point-blank range. The human vessel's hull was designed to absorb incredible damage while delivering devastating firepower. Both ships exploded in a ball of white fire, but the human had taken a coalition heavy cruiser with it. More human ships were already committed to similar attacks. Captain Susan Blake's voice came over the communication system as her ship accelerated toward a Nexus battleship. "This is for the children on Kepler 442b, you alien monsters." Her ship struck the battleship's main reactor section and both vessels disappeared in an explosion that lit up the entire battlefield. "They're all insane," Krill whispered, staring at the tactical display where human ships continued their suicide runs. But Vex was beginning to understand something terrible. The humans weren't being reckless or desperate. Every attack was carefully planned to cause maximum damage to coalition forces. They had studied alien ship designs and knew exactly where to hit for the most devastating effect. Lieutenant Commander Tom Mitchell's ship targeted the weapon systems of a hegemony dreadnought. As his vessel broke apart under enemy fire, he managed to cripple the alien ship's main guns before dying. Captain Lisa Rodriguez aimed for the engine section of a Skarn destroyer, leaving it dead in space and vulnerable to follow-up attacks. The battle continued for 6 brutal hours. Human ships kept appearing from hidden positions throughout the asteroid field, launching attacks that no rational species would consider. They fought like every single battle might decide the fate of their entire civilization. When the shooting finally stopped, Vex looked at his casualty reports with trembling claws. The coalition had lost 37 ships, including some of their most powerful vessels. The humans had lost 42 ships, but that didn't matter to them. Every human crew had died willingly to protect their worlds. "Sir," Krill said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Korath of the Kelvani." Korath's image appeared on the damaged bridge screen. The alien diplomat looked tired and sad. "General Vex, I tried to warn your alliance. The humans do not fight wars the way we understand them." Vex's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" "They do not fight to conquer territory or gain resources," Korath explained. "They fight for ideas, freedom, independence, the right to determine their own future. And they believe these ideas are worth any sacrifice, including their own lives." Vex looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Fear was beginning to replace their earlier confidence. They had expected to fight a normal war against a weaker enemy. Instead, they were facing something none of them understood, an entire species that seemed willing to die rather than surrender. "How do you defeat an enemy like that?" Vex asked. Korath's expression was grim. "General, I have studied the humans for 30 years since our first encounter. The answer is simple: you don't. You either leave them alone, or you prepare to lose everything you have trying to conquer them." The transmission ended, leaving Vex alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that this war was far from over. Fleet Admiral Zork sat in his command center aboard the massive ship Conqueror, staring at reports that made his 2 hearts beat faster with fear. The war had been going on for 6 weeks now, and nothing was happening the way it was supposed to. "Admiral," said Commander Youth, his intelligence officer, "we've lost 23 more ships in the latest engagement near Proxima Station. The humans are using civilian vessels now, cargo ships, medical transports, even school buses equipped with weapons." Zork's massive gray form shifted uncomfortably in his specially built chair. "That makes no sense. Civilized species keep their military and civilian populations separate during war." "Sir, the humans don't seem to understand that rule," Youth continued, his voice strained. "Yesterday, a human medical ship called the Florence was carrying wounded soldiers from an earlier battle. When our boarding teams tried to capture it for information, the human captain destroyed his own ship rather than surrender." Zork felt his stomach drop. "The wounded died?" "All of them, sir. 200 injured humans, 50 medical staff, and our boarding team. The captain sent one message before the explosion: "No human will ever be a prisoner while I still draw breath." For 30 years, Zork had conquered 12 different solar systems. He had faced desperate enemies before, species that fought hard to defend their homes. But he had never encountered anything like this. The humans seemed to prefer death over defeat in ways that made no logical sense. A priority communication signal interrupted his dark thoughts. Ambassador Kortha's image appeared on the main screen, and the Kelvani looked even more tired than usual. "Admiral Zork," Korth began without greeting, "I have received permission from my government to share classified information about our encounter with the humans 30 years ago." "Speak quickly, Korth. My patience grows thin with each ship I lose." Korth took a deep breath. "The human research vessel we met was called the Discovery. It carried 47 people, scientists, technicians, and their families. There were even children on board, Admiral. Children as young as 5 years old." Zork leaned forward despite himself. "Continue." "Our captain followed standard procedure and demanded surrender for inspection. The human captain, a woman named Helen Brooks, responded immediately." Korth paused, his hands trembling slightly. She said, "My children will not grow up as slaves to anyone. If you want this ship, you'll have to take it from our dead bodies." "Empty threats from a desperate parent," Zork said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, Admiral." Captain Brooks meant every word. She ordered her crew to reroute all power from life support, artificial gravity, even the lights, and channel it into their main deflector array. She was creating an artificial star using her ship's power core. Zork felt his blood turn cold. "That's suicide for everyone aboard." "Yes, it was. But she gave our ships one final warning. She said, 'Tell your people that humans do not surrender. Tell them that we choose how we die.' Then she activated the deflector array. The bridge of the Conqueror fell completely silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Finally, Zork found his voice. "What happened?" "The explosion destroyed 3 of our heavy cruisers instantly," Korth replied. "The energy release was so powerful it created a debris field that still glows with radiation 30 years later. We named it the Brooks Nebula in memory of what we learned that day." Commander Youth spoke up from his station. "Sir, we're receiving similar reports from our other commanders. The humans on New Geneva poisoned their own water supply rather than let us use their colony. 50,000 colonists died to kill 12,000 of our troops." Zork's massive hands gripped the arms of his chair so hard the metal began to bend. "They killed their own people?" "Not just adults, sir. Entire families chose death together rather than live under our rule. The colony's final transmission was a human child singing something called a lullaby while the poison took effect." More reports came flooding in from across the battle zone. On the mining world of Kepler 438b, human workers had collapsed the main shaft tunnels, burying themselves alive along with a hegemony occupation force. The agricultural world of Ross 128 had been set on fire by its own farmers, destroying food supplies that could have fed millions but ensuring the invaders would get nothing. "Admiral," Youth continued, "our psychological warfare specialists are reporting complete failure. Normal fear tactics don't work on humans. When we threaten to destroy their cities, they evacuate the civilians and turn the cities into weapons. When we capture their soldiers, they refuse to give information even under torture. Many choose to die rather than speak." Zork stared at the tactical display showing coalition positions throughout human space. Red markers indicated battles fought, blue markers showed occupied worlds, and yellow markers represented human fleet movements. What he saw made his heart sink. The humans weren't retreating anymore. They were advancing. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "We have superior numbers, better weapons, more advanced ships." Kortha's image flickered as the transmission quality degraded. "Admiral, may I tell you something my grandfather taught me?" He said, "Never fight an enemy who has already decided to die. They have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." "But they're not just dying," Zork protested. "They're choosing death over reasonable surrender terms. We offered to let them live as workers in our empire." "That's exactly the problem," Korth replied sadly. "To humans, being a slave is worse than being dead. They have concepts like freedom and dignity that they value more than their own lives. They would rather see their entire species extinct than see it enslaved." A new alarm began sounding on the bridge. Commander Youth checked his sensors and went pale. "Admiral, long-range scanners are detecting human fleet movements. Large formations are heading toward our supply lines." Zork looked at the display and felt fear like he had never known before. The humans weren't just defending anymore. They were preparing to attack the coalition's home systems. For the first time since the war began, he wondered if his people had made a terrible mistake. The humans might be primitive by coalition standards, but they possessed something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They possessed the absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for. And that made them the most terrifying enemy Zork had ever faced. 8 months after the first alien ship entered human space, Ambassador Korith sat in the ruins of what had once been the proud capital city of the Skarn Dominion. Broken towers reached toward a sky filled with smoke, and the smell of burned metal hung heavy in the air. Across from him at a simple metal table sat Admiral Margaret Thompson of the Human Defense Force. The surrender documents lay between them, written in multiple alien languages. Korith's hands shook as he reached for the signing pen. Complete surrender of all coalition military forces, Admiral Thompson read aloud. Her voice was tired, like someone who had seen too much death. Immediate withdrawal from all human territory. War reparations to be paid over 50 years. Around them, the evidence of human warfare was everywhere. The coalition had learned too late what it meant to fight an enemy that valued freedom more than life itself. The once mighty Skarn capital looked like it had been hit by a natural disaster, but this destruction was entirely man-made. I tried to warn them, Korith said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. My people tried to stop this madness before it began. Admiral Thompson's expression softened slightly. We know, Ambassador. The Kelvani Empire will be treated fairly in the final peace agreement. Your warnings saved your people from sharing the Dominion's fate. Through the broken windows, they could see human ships maintaining their positions in orbit above the planet. The vessels looked different from the sleek diplomatic craft that had once visited this world. These were warships built for destruction, and they had proven terrifyingly effective. The war had turned completely around in just 2 months. What started as a coalition invasion had become a human counterattack that left entire alien civilizations begging for mercy. The humans had done something no one thought possible. They had turned their apparent weakness into devastating strength. General Vex had been the first to understand this, but his understanding came too late. During the Battle of Wolf 359, his flagship was surrounded by human vessels. Instead of trying to capture or disable the alien ship, Captain William Foster had aimed his cruiser directly at Vex's command bridge. In the final moments before impact, Foster was broadcasting something called Amazing Grace, a human song about hope and redemption. The explosion had killed everyone on both ships, but it also eliminated the coalition's most experienced military commander. Tell me about New Manchester, Admiral Thompson said suddenly. Korith flinched. New Manchester had been a human agricultural world with 2 million colonists, families, children, elderly people who had never been soldiers. When coalition forces landed to occupy the planet, they expected the usual pattern. Some resistance, then surrender, then cooperation. Instead, the colonists had done something unthinkable. The humans poisoned their own water supply, Korith said slowly. They used a biological agent that was harmless to human physiology but deadly to most coalition species. 50,000 of our troops died within hours of landing. And the colonists? Korith closed his eyes. They knew the poison would kill them too, eventually. 2 million people chose death rather than live under our rule. The planet's final transmission was a human child singing to her baby brother while the poison took effect. Admiral Thompson nodded grimly. She had known many of those families personally. The coalition called it madness. Perhaps it was, Korith replied. But it was effective madness. After New Manchester, our troops began refusing orders to occupy human worlds. They were terrified of what the humans might do. The humans had weaponized their own determination in ways that no military strategist could predict or counter. When the coalition attacked the human mining world of Tau Ceti, the miners had collapsed their tunnels, burying themselves alive along with the invasion force. When alien forces surrounded the human colony on Kepler 442b, the colonists had turned their fusion power plants into bombs, taking out entire orbital bombardment fleets. Most terrifying of all had been the Battle of Proxima Station. The humans had converted civilian ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even school transports into weapons. Each vessel was loaded with volunteers and aimed at coalition capital ships. The aliens watched in horror as grandparents, teachers, and teenagers flew their improvised weapons into enemy vessels, singing human songs as they died. Commander Thale of the Nexus Empire? Admiral Thompson asked. Captured during the siege of Nexus Prime, Korith answered. He kept asking our interrogators why humans were willing to die for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity. He never understood the answer. Admiral Zork of the Hegemony had understood, but too late to save his civilization. When human fleets appeared in hegemony space, he had tried to negotiate. The humans' response was simple: unconditional surrender or total destruction. Zork chose surrender after human engineers demonstrated their willingness to crash asteroids into populated worlds rather than allow those worlds to remain under alien control. The war could have ended differently, Korath said as he signed the surrender document. If we had listened to the warnings, if we had left your species alone. Admiral Thompson took the signed papers and sealed them in a protective case. Ambassador, there's something you should understand about humans. We didn't want this war. We tried diplomacy first. But when someone threatens our families, our homes, our right to exist as free beings, we become something else entirely. She looked out at the devastated city around them. Every human who died in this war chose to die. They could have surrendered, could have accepted slavery, could have begged for mercy. Instead, they chose to fight until their last breath to ensure their children would be born free. Korath stood to leave, his legs unsteady. Admiral, may I ask you something? Go ahead. Was it worth the cost? So many human lives lost, so many worlds damaged. Admiral Thompson was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the human ships that now controlled the orbit of this once mighty alien world. Finally she spoke. Ambassador, some things are worth any price. Freedom is one of them. The right to determine our own destiny is another. Yes, it was worth it. As Korath walked through the rubble-filled streets toward his transport, he reflected on the lesson his species had learned. The humans were not the strongest or most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but they possessed something more dangerous than technology or numbers. They possessed the absolute conviction that death was preferable to slavery, and that made them unconquerable.